Hello and welcome to Data Conversations Over Coffee with myself, Craig Stewart. We're back in the studio here in London, and I've got a really good friend of mine in studio with me, Maciej, who is the Chief Data Officer at CIB for Absa. Maciej, thanks so much for coming in. How are you doing, man?
Good, man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So what we wanted to talk to you today about really is this notion that you've got of really running your data office as a startup. You know, you've got to go out there and actually sell your data products. You've got to, do the legwork, be an entrepreneur in some ways, communicate. So I wanted to get some ideas around you, like why the startup idea? I've kind of been pushing it for a while, and I've mentioned it to quite a few people that you need to go out there and really drive it pretty hard. It's not going to end up working just naturally. It's a tough piece of work. So why do you kind of see it as a startup?
So in the industry, right, like everyone knows, most data people, that's the core aspect, like what they struggle with, is getting this concept of data across to everyone within the organization. More importantly, trying to sell the value of data, right? So I looked at the strategy and I kept thinking, like, what is an operating model that we could follow where people have the same struggles? Entrepreneurs that have startups especially have to be as robust and drive their value through partnerships as much as possible in order to get a thing to start up, right? So I kind of diluted and kind of dissected kind of their operating models and looked at, well, if we can start delivering value as a valuable, or let's call it data as a valued product inside the organization, which we all know we want to and we have to, but it's become quite difficult, then how can I not kind of take parts of that startup evolution or methodology and just use it in a corporate bank, like I work in at the moment now? So when I looked at like kind of the end game, is what do we want to do? And like I've mentioned already, is that we want to land value, business value inside the bank with data. Then we said, well, how do you do that? A startup would normally develop a product, would develop something that would be focused on selling something either new or innovative to a whole new bunch of people, right? And this is kind of something what we need to do. Everyone knows data is one of the last entrants into the game. Innovation, design, and digital have always been there. But I think when we look at data, it's still kind of a gray area for most people. And we can only make it kind of a little bit more clearer and colorful once we start landing that value. They actually physically see and feel the impact of data. So we said, well, how do we now really take that concept of having it land in their hands? And this is what we called, we termed something called embedding business data assets, right? So data asset, everyone would understand that there's something that is infused into the business. But the angle that we're going in, that it provides commercial value. And that commercial value is something that we feel that these data products that will land up in the business will drive their value in their business, not for us as a data team, for them. And that's the sequence of events that we wanted to. So the end game is to land the value in business with something physical that they can touch. So think about it very simply, if I had to simplify it, like a new insight or a predictive analytics insight that they've never had before on a dashboard that works within their system. So we're at Absa quite fond of Salesforce. It's our front-end CRM tool, and that's where the value should live. We don't need another swivel chair into another screen, to another login, because that's when things fail. What is the thing that they need to focus on, and something that focus on in their specific tool that they currently use? But more importantly, we've termed something that I've also put into the team is that the term of building walls around different business units. These walls are coming up, and we're not sharing data and everything. So we said, you know what? Let's rather not work as hard as we need to break down the walls. Let's work smarter. Let's dig trenches under each one of the business units and provide value, almost like a SWAT team underneath, behind it. I wouldn't say enemy lines because we're all friends, but just between the business units in trenches underneath, and that value surfaces and what they see and use every single day. So very exciting times. We are getting very good traction around it because of the mental change. We're not really doing anything different that we've done before, but we're marketing in a sense that this is something that will land up in your hands part of what you do every single day. The value will be realized, right? So if you provide a new insight, especially in a bank, people know you have to go sell a product. It needs to fall into the books. The product needs to have transaction through it, and then the value will slowly come in onto the balance sheet. It's not just like a bang, we've sold X amount, unless you're very lucky. So it's this progression of changing people's mindset, almost a change management approach to saying, how do we actually truly drive a data strategy to become data-led, especially in a corporate bank?
Yeah. And we've talked about the data university a lot, and that's how you're obviously taking this message to business and getting them involved. So I don't want to go into too much detail because there's loads of content that we've done with that already. But I found when I was starting Ceridium here in South Africa, it was about shopping it around to the industry, kind of building up the network, the communication, the message around it. How have you done that in the bank? And what sort of lessons can you give to people who have got a relatively new data office within their organizations about just going out and meeting people, having the conversations? I used to do the round tables and just get people involved, just so that people knew who we were, what CDAO was, what the CDO was doing. How have you gone about doing that? Because I think for me, that's one of the biggest things about sort of that entrepreneurial and startup mindset is just working really hard at it.
Look, I mean, I think to simplify that process, and you've kind of followed exactly the same methodology we did, we met with people, right? We said, we're not here, and this is especially for people that have just started the data team or actually need to get it up and running. It's not about what the data team can do for you. It's first going and meeting the different business units or whatever you want to call it in the organization that you work. It's understanding the problems, reading between the lines. Like, what are they actually struggling with, right? And 9 times out of 10, most organizations, it's maybe the quality of data that they're using, or they don't have enough signals from machines to make an informed decision. It usually boils down to data. Usually that's the bloodline of most organizations. So what we need to really do is provide a set of questions, and I'm happy to also go through them if anyone wants to contact me outside of this talk, is asking questions around what are you struggling with? What are your biggest challenges? Show me the reports that you make decisions from. And don't come and say, well, AI, this magic dust is the silver bullet's going to solve everything that everyone seems to be saying these days. It's actually understanding the core business problem, not the core data problem. And that's when we truly can wrap it around. Let's call it wrap the data solution around it to help people move forward. Ask the right questions. Don't sell the product in the beginning. Once the product lands, that's when we start really adding the value element to it, like what we did with the business data assets.
Yeah. And I think that's actually a valuable point, is when you're starting a new business of any sort, you go and identify who your target audience is, who's going to be your customer, who's going to be buying your product. What does that product need to look like? So it's really about going and understanding from everybody within the business, what does the data office product need to look like? And you go then build those data assets for them. How do you go about embedding those data assets then after you've understood what it is that they really need? Because I think that's where things seem to fall down. And if you think about a startup, it'll often fail because you've run too fast, or you haven't understood perfectly what your customer needs, or you did, but you built something different, or you didn't manage to get them to believe in it. How do you go about really embedding those assets? How do you get people involved in the process, energized around the process, and actually saying, we need this data asset, we can't survive without it?
So I've restructured our capabilities. We have 4 capabilities in our data strategy that we currently run at the bank. And I'll go through them very quickly. But I think what we did was that same concept of being able to sell a product in the end. You have to have a pipeline of events, right? You have to have things that happen in almost a sequence of things before you get that done. And some people will challenge me and say, well, data is kind of sporadic. It could kind of pop up anywhere, or you could start at any part of the data value chain. Everyone's data value chain is different. Our data value chain, we structured in a way that we have our first capability called data protection. Obviously, understanding that this is data, understanding the data and how much can we trust the data, right? So what's the quality? Is it owned? Do we know where the source is from? Making sure we wrap that up. That's actually a business responsibility. They own the data. So we work with them and it's the first question that we ask when we kick off a project. It's like, where's the available data, or what's the available data, and where does it come from? Then our next capability is data enablement, and this is where we kick off our data value chain. And we say, well, the data enablement team is the guys that go, all right, we know where the data comes from. Let's go find it. And once we find the data, then the next capability comes in. It's data maturity and IQ. This is something that now we're talking about the data university to say it's all good that we have good, owned, trusted quality data. We know where to find it. And when we get, I'm not sure if this is going to be in a talk the opposite way, but let me just carry on with the sequence. But in the third part is the data literacy part, is saying, well, we've given people this data. Do they know how to use it? And this is a step that a lot of people forget, is that you can provide all the best, let's call it, cleaned data lake data into a central place that with one click they can access, but do they actually know how to use it? Do they know how to find it? Do they know how to bring kind of it together so they can have a meaningful insight? And once that comes through and we say, yes, they are mature enough to use this data, we start adding the value. That's our fourth capability. And last part of the data value chain is called analytics enablement, to make sure that those people in there drive the inherent value. And how we make the value embed in business, they own it.
Yeah.
It's not for us to own. We're not going to become another MI shop or a BI shop where we build reports and just show people. No. We take these data assets and we embed them in business. We have a partnered approach. We co-create. And that value that I spoke about earlier, that is owned by business.
Yeah.
And we typically ask, so where are you struggling with on a specific, maybe product in a revenue line in a specific sector? Here. What's the number? X. Okay, let's see how we can work together to better that number. So either close the gap or improve revenue there. That's the business number, not our number. And that's how we truly embed these business data assets, because they fundamentally filter into the hands and become part of their process, not, like I said, a swivel chair into trying to log into something else to get that insight.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned co-creation. It's something I go on about a lot. And I think it is such a it's the cornerstone of any successful data office maturity, building a data-centric organization, is that you're actually getting business involved in developing these assets, these products, these models, so that they feel that they've got ownership as well, and they've got some sort of skin in the game to go and do that. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. And I think anybody watching this that is at the start or they're struggling to get traction, think about roping in the people that you actually want to buy the product. It's kind of like going and creating the product with your customer. You know, not all businesses do that, but you have the opportunity to actually go and do that, that for them. And then the other thing you've been talking about really is the structure of the team. You're talking about someone who does data enablement, analytics enablement. And I think that's where people also get stuck, is how do we structure the team? What does the team need to look? If you think about it as a business, right, your startup, your data office as a startup, you start off maybe by yourself and you kind of go and fight the good fight by yourself, but then you have to scale up in terms of the types of people that you've got. How do you sort of suggest people structure that? What types of people do you need? Do you only use people that are full-time employees? Do you outsource? Do you use contractors? Maybe you can give us some advice on that.
Sure. Now, just to close on the comment of customer first, I think two guys that mentioned before is a guy named Jeff, who runs like Amazon or something. Yeah, I think he always, I'm sure he's quite successful, and he always said customer first, then you build technology backwards. And same thing with Steve Jobs. So they're quite successful companies. And that's kind of the ideology that we want to move to. And customer first, and it's something that we strive for, but it is quite difficult to wrap it around. So from a team structure perspective, it's quite unique in a way, because every data team will have its own character and our own emotions attached to how we want to run. Some people are very excited, and some people are absolutely willing to give everything up to get this thing done. Or some people are very standoffish and saying, well, I don't want to poke the bear yet, let's see how we get it done. So it depends, right? So I'll give you my experience. So what we did is we first kind of developed a small core team. I'm not going to give the number, but it's more specifically how we stabilize the team. So we said, okay, there's two main parts of our team. The back end, so making sure that the data is correct and finding the right data, and almost the front end, showing people how to use it. And we split the capability in those two core aspects. I like to simplify things. So in the back end, this is where you think about where does the SME knowledge, the IP, the data structures, how data is used, all those things that actually happen in the business. We said that sits within the organization. These are things that are based, that are always going to be there. Finding the right data, building the pipelines, being able to kind of identify where are the specific structures that need to filter into those end results that we're looking for. So that's the team that we invested in of a more permanent basis. those are the people that we want to keep in the business, keep the IP there, and make sure that those like feet or bodies are bolted into the platforms and rails of the organization. And then the front end, we were like, well, okay, it's quite variable. That's quite static and stable. The other one's quite variable. Because these data assets change, some of them we could deliver in a week, some of them take 6 months. Because of that variability, we said, well, there we need a little bit more play in terms of our workforce. So we went the contracting and kind of partnership approach with a team that we work with across the world. And we bring those resources in when we need them for specific actions. Because the variability, the delivery, is in the business data assets. We can deliver an HR analytics tool that predicts specific actions that we need for that specific tool. Or it could be a cache optimization. It could be just a specific insight on attrition. It depends on the use case that or let's call it the value that we're targeting. But that variability, we need to have variable skills in the team. And we've gone from very, very large data teams down to smaller federated teams, and it feels like the more fluid and agile we are in our way, the better the business reacts to it, purely because the absorption of content is not like a central team ramming stuff down, like corporate structures. It's more like we're part of you. We are a team with you, not for you. Yeah. And everything we do, we partner and co-create with you, and that seems to kind of build much better into our corporate culture and the way that we run. And that fundamentally transforms the value that has landed in the business, because that variability allows people to cross-pollinate in that team, that let's call it the front-end team, but also allows us, once the project stops, from a contractual basis, we can move the person into another space to start delivering value, or we end the contract because we know that it's only going to be delivered in X amount of time. So it also gives us a little bit of free, or let's call it risk adverse, or it reduces our risk in our space, so that we can focus on the things to deliver the value, and not, classic old large organizations sit and actually get these bodies all over the place, and no one knows what they're doing.
So you're kind of talking about having quite a lean and agile organization and having the right people with the right skills at the right time. So I think that seems to be a common mistake. I'm not saying it's something that everybody or every organization does, but they often tend to go and just build the data team, and they've got this big central sort of thing. And I know you've kind of been back and forth on it, but is that kind of the advice, is have the right number of people, the right skills at the right time? Obviously, you talk about that core team. You need, sort of the owners of it. But is that kind of the advice that you're giving is,
That's it. Yeah. I think spot on. I think go with the character and the emotion. Like, a lot of people forget about, they think data and emotion. It's like kind of oil and water, right? It doesn't really, but it really, really is important to understand the emotion and character of the organization and use that as the backbone to building the team. The core team, right, is about making sure that we keep connecting the dots, fusing the different areas, pushing stuff through the data value chain. Everything else in the front end becomes completely variable. So I would, spot on. Focus on what the business needs. Ask the right questions. Deliver the value. And if some people are like, this is life-changing, this is game-changing, and we truly need to get this into the business, then measure that impact by the amount of permanent resources that you want. Look at the longevity of these projects. Make sure that you truly understand that where is this value going to land and who's going to support you through that. And if you get that, it will be very easy to come up with the team. And one last thing probably on this as well is start small. We've tried, a lot of people outside of the kind of where I work with colleagues in the data space, they've also tried to consolidate teams together, to take, and I spoke about this at the last DataCon that we could actually meet in person. Consolidating teams is fine, but remember the chemistry and the let's call it the characteristics of different data teams, especially if they've been in the organization for a long time, to make them fit and now to drive let's call it a centralized approach in order to drive a data strategy becomes quite difficult. Start small, focus on the value, get that over the line, embed the data asset, get people using it, and I promise you, as what we're experiencing now, there's natural progression for more and more demand. It doesn't stop. So it's also a warning. Make sure that you kind of bite off what you can actually chew. But at the end of the day, it's, again, about the custom and about the value for the people working in business.
So your motivation around this, your hunger, your energy is really apparent. And I've known you for quite a while now, and I know that you really drive things, and there are always ups and downs. How do you kind of go about keeping your team motivated? Because it's not something that you just do over a 6-month project. Great, we've got the data office sorted, everybody's using data, we're data-centric, the models are in production, or they're actually sort of in play within business. It's a long fight, and I think any entrepreneur, any startup organization is going to have that same sort of thing, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, and then things change. How do you stay motivated, and how do you keep your team motivated? What do you use to really say, guys, we are on the right path, we're headed in the right direction?
It's a great question, and what we've done recently, right, because obviously COVID, working from home, it was been a bit of a shock to kind of the working dynamic. Well, we've had a very good year last year, a very busy year last year. So what I offer to the team is that what we want to start, and we've started doing, we call these things Oscar projects.
Yeah.
So Oscar, as in you go win a Grammy and award, not the other Oscar. And I think the most important thing there is that we truly want to make sure that people understand that they have an opportunity to do something that they really want to do. So it's about, like, let's call it a bi-directional relationship. They either come to us and say this is what they want to do. We find something and match it to their skills and say this is what you should be doing. Again, everyone every year needs to deliver an Oscar status project, and then we have like a mini award session at the end of the year, who won the best in each division. Like you have the best actor, the best this, the best that. We'll have that division or let's call it, they have that award ceremony at the end of the year on these different projects. And I think that kind of motivates people because it kind of fuses of what they want to do and kind of the work that they're currently doing. There's always a way to make it work with people's career aspirations, but more importantly, with what the value can land up in the business. And another thing that we've also really started doing and kind of made it a little bit more fun, especially around execution, is gamification. You'll be absolutely, it'll be blown away on how much impact is a little bit of competition, not only in the team, but doing it into the business. So a couple of the projects that we're working on is we're creating metrics for people to measure kind of their impact, their relative impact in the execution. So we have people by name. It's not like, we have to go through Poppy. It's all internal. And this is a way to motivate and reward people inside the business for helping us execute. So, the day of, we're going to hire a big consulting agency and come up with a methodology, operating model, how to get this done. We said, well, let's bank that money, use that money to come up with a reward scheme or a program where that will reward people for helping us execute. It's not to say now we're going to double pay people for doing their job, but in most instances, when it comes to, for example, fixing data quality, it's usually over and above. It's an additional thing that they need to be cognizant of, that they are adding that value back into the business.
They're driving the right behavior.
That's it.
Yeah.
And with that, with rewarding, everyone needs a little bit of help after COVID as well. It's been a tough time for everyone. And I think that way of showing people that we're rewarding the people that are actually helping us execute on the ground massively changed the way that people approach the data office, and that they see, okay, I can be part of the solution, that I'm not always being caused at the problem. So I'm not going to take the detail or go into the detail around it, but I think that's where it revolutionized the way that people actually engage with us, because people want to get involved, especially when there's a bit of a reward or competition behind it.
Yeah.
Doesn't need to be extravagant and massive, but it does need to be kind of something just small, so that we're giving back to the people that actually matter.
And I think people watching this kind of potentially fall into that sort of notion of there's just so much to do. I've got to go do the data stuff. I've got to go do comms. I've got to co-create models. I've got to go talk to the board or the exco around what we're doing with data. Then I've got to think about things like Oscars and gamification and all that sort of thing. There's a lot to do. How do you go about sort of leveraging relationships across the organization to help you get this stuff done? Because you can't do it all yourself. I think you have to get help. And I think, startups always look, how do I work with that company? Can they help me? How do we get shared value? How do you go about sort of getting those relationships done to help you kind of do all these great things?
So what we've done was, it was something that we really struggled with, because we still I would say, considered to other massive banks, we're still a smallish team. But I think if we look at the way that we approach the different business areas, and if you see someone has a very strong connection, you'll have connections with people and not, right? And we've assigned them as data champions of those specific areas. We say, well, you are the kind of almost like as a a coverage person, which we call bankers. Banker would go see a client. You have a list of clients that you go look after. If you need specific products, they'll call you. Same concept applies. People are comfortable with that approach. That is your data champion. If you've got any specific data issues, we channel it to that person, and then they look back into the team, say, guys, I need help. And then if we can do it, we put it into action. If not, we put it into the backlog. And that's the relationship building that we need to get across the organization. So if people are each divide and conquer across the organization, and those data champions have that relationship and understanding with the business, and we centrally filter back to a place where we all work off, and that backlog gets constantly cleaned and scrubbed every 2 weeks, then we have an ability to make sure that we have the right level of priority, so everyone feels loved in a sense, but more importantly, we're also targeting the right value, right? We're always going to target the things with the highest value and minimal effort, but making sure that that same concept is applied across all the different, what we call now data domains. So yeah, it's a bit of a tricky situation. You do need to patch up, and where there's a relationship that's not working, I'll get involved and I've got a unique ability to really read between the lines, and rebuild that relationship, or I'm even taking it on myself to take it that I'll become your data champion for now, because for me, it's more important that I have that deep understanding of their business and their relationship than not being able to help them at all.
All right, my last question is around, we started, the whole point of this is thinking like a startup and acting like a startup within the data environment. And often you'll see companies that sort of still spruik themselves as startups, and they've been going for 5 or 6 or 7 years. I don't know when the startup phase actually ends and you're not a startup anymore. And they become a bit more corporate, and they think, yeah, we're still a startup, we're still cool because we've got ping pong table and chef and all those sorts of things. But they don't necessarily live the values or the actions of a startup, being agile, kind of shopping things around, having the energy driving it. How do you kind of keep yourself from getting to that point where you've scaled up, you come a little bit too corporate, you have lots of structures in place, and you lose that sort of energy of a startup? How do you kind of give yourself a check every week, every quarter, to say, are we still acting like a startup? Are we still sort of driving things, or have we become complacent and just another big corporate business unit?
So I think twofold, right? So the first one would be, for us to keep true to our startup culture and value, we have weekly reviews, and we like, guys, this is gloves off, no barring back. You guys can be brutal against each other and what you're seeing and being delivered. It never gets ugly. It becomes actually quite funny, So it's not to say that we're not taking it seriously, but it's to say that we should not always be so hard on ourselves. Out there in the big world, in the corporate banking space, we're very serious about everything that we do. But as a team, we don't think, at the moment everyone's working from home, we don't have the ping pong tables and all of that, but we have the core ability to be, still have that same culture and protect our culture inside the team. And in that sense, the second point is don't become, what I've done, I made a direct decision, is we don't want to become too big. A core team of X amount relative to what you need to deliver is the best element. So the permanent resources, we treat our contractors and our guys that we partner with as part of the team, but we don't become too big. Yeah. If the demand becomes too big, then we need to restructure ourselves. At the moment, I purposely kept the team small to protect the culture. But, it's about up to how the team develops. I'm a type of person, I just kind of, from a distance, not too far, but from a distance, just watch how the chemistry is going between people. People come and go all the time, but it's about making sure that the core aspect is protected, and it's about delivery, it's about challenging each other, it's about having fun on the job, it's about keeping people accountable for the Oscar projects, and most importantly, and the last one, is the ownership of delivery inside the business. So not to say I'm delivering this project, but we also need to sanitize the house, right? Guys, if we're using 4 or 5 platforms, like maybe Trello, for example, to do our Kanbans, and then Confluence to keep stuff there, and Microsoft Teams with all these different directories to make sure that we are all communicating in the right way. I have instilled that each person needs to, on a monthly basis, rotate through those and sanitize and make sure that we're keeping those things at a high quality level. And that's a startup again. We're not and just letting things fester and grow. Yeah. We're getting everyone to own their own part, because in startups, everyone needs to do a bit of everyone's job. Everyone's involved in everyone's business, and making sure that the house is always clean when we deliver that value. Yeah,
that's a good point. Our CEO, Charlie, always talked about, in the early days of Corinium, being willing to take out the trash as well. So you can do all the cool jobs, the nice jobs of things, but also be willing to go and do the sanitization around things, kind of, you know, clean things up. And everybody's got to muck in, I think, and get it done. And I think that's great. If you've got that culture where everyone on your team is driving forward, we own this, we're part of this, we want to have the legacy that, you know, we built the greatest data office that CIB's ever seen. I think you'll get there.
Let's hope.
There. But thanks so much for joining me. Always good to catch up.
Thank you, Craig.
Awesome.
All right, thank
Cheers.
you. Cheers.